Awesome. Okay, so let's call this meeting to order. First order of business is approving the minutes from our March 13th meeting.
I so moved.
I'll second it.
We have a motion and a second, Nancy McEwen and Bob Perkel.
Right.
Before we have the welcome message, I would like to say something. You know, I've been thinking a lot about, I'm hijacking. I've been thinking a lot about the nonprofits. I don't know how many years we've been giving grants out to nonprofits from the city, so I don't know the history of that. Some others may know that. So I don't really know what the initial purpose of that was, but then questions come up about what is the city's goal of giving money to the nonprofits? Do we want, my further questions are, do we want to continue doing it this way? Do we want to look at the city putting line items in their budget for, say, food grants, social service grants, or something? I'm just talking off the top of my head. So I wanted to bring it to the budget committee to have some discussion. Short discussion, probably.
I know when we as a council have spoken in the past, we've talked about it being dollars going to organizations that are doing things that are important for our community that the city doesn't have the resources or capability of doing without doing it for much more dollars than what we are providing. At the same time, by bringing it through the budget committee, it allows community members to be involved in those decisions as opposed to just a council deciding to spend the tax dollars.
Okay. And I see that in the explanation as well. Any other discussion about that?
No, I do like the fact that it is, that part is open to the community and whoever would want to come forward. And also, it places a little bit of accountability with whoever's coming back to us each year. You know, did you really spend it on what you said last year, and what are this year's funds going toward? But you know, we've had good input over the years from police department and public works and our players that are on the payroll saying how much it helps them and what they do and frees up time to do what they should be doing. Yeah, that's a good part of it.
I think I've been on the budget committee longer than anybody else. I've been on the budget committee since maybe it might have been 2008, 2009, definitely 2010. And we've come a long way as far as our expectations of the information of the nonprofits to give us. When I was first on the budget committee, nonprofits were not expected to provide us with financial statements or how they had used funds. Pretty much it was, here's how much money we want, and maybe saying what they were going to do with it. And it was not discussed very much how much people were going to get. It was a sort of a vote around the table. And Becky, I think you've been, actually now that I think about it, you've been on as long as I have. Yeah. And I think that we have higher expectations and higher goals now, which I believe is very good. We talk about purpose more than I remember purpose being talked about 13, 14 years ago. It was kind of like, oh, well, this is so-and-so, they're a good organization, they want this much, okay. And I'd love to get Becky's perspective on it too. So, but what it has evolved into is definitely us thinking about, if the city could provide these services, would we provide them? Could we provide them? Is this a way to enhance, support what we're already doing or want to do? Is it something that is for the betterment of most of the citizens in the city? I think that's the tone I see that we have come to.
And I agree with that, because in my mind, I always want to donate or contribute to the organizations on behalf of the budget committee that enhances the city's position. You know, the city doesn't have the resources to help on this, but this organization does. It helps out our police department, or it helps out whatever. And so some of the organizations, like, I'll just use.
Thank you, Kim.
Like 4-H or something, for example. I have a hard time seeing a group like that getting our funds, because it's such a little small segment of, you know, it doesn't involve the entire community as much.
Right.
So I think that's what we've been trying to develop it into is.
It's a use of community resources
Right.
and the best and highest use of tax dollars for Seaside. 14 years ago, you didn't hear the question, how much of your business happens in Seaside? You didn't hear that. And we've evolved, and
Right.
yes, this is Seaside taxpayer money and needs to be helping in Seaside.
The other thing that I see it as, though, is I think it's an edification of our talk around supporting volunteers and being a volunteer community that keeps our town going, and being able to fund some of that work that's happening that is supporting our community. It allows us to put our money where our mouths are.
That's interesting, because I've never seen it as a purpose to support volunteerism or volunteers or independent organizations.
It's why we have issues with organizations that come in asking for funds, where it's going to salaries, administration, those types of things, because we want to see it going to the purpose that they're doing, as opposed to into somebody's pocket.
Yeah, and I think we all have varying views on the impact on the whole city or most of the residents, as opposed to giving the money to, I'm gonna say, small groups that don't have that long outreach or further outreach. And some of that outreach isn't direct, some of it's indirect, such as CCA, the food bank. You know, you could say, well, that's giving to a small group of the citizens, but in the long run, it's a reach that is connecting. Steve?
I've been through this process twice now with the city giving money to private charities, nonprofits, and I'm still baffled. I'm more baffled now than I was a year ago, and I just don't get it. This is, I mean, the conversations we have, I understand there are wonderful people in Seaside, and there's lots of great projects, and I'm sure that we all give money to charities that we are interested in. But this is a government agency, and our conversation keeps circling back to, oh, we have to be responsible, it's taxpayer funds. I think the reason we keep having that conversation, we get into that loop, is because the whole process is wrong. It feels like it's neither fish nor fowl. We're taking tax money. This is a government agency, and it's getting involved in private charity. That feels very much like government overreach to me. I respect the people in Seaside. I think they're generous and intelligent. I don't think they need this committee's help to give away their own money. And again, this is a government agency. This city employs people with guns. This city employs attorneys, and with every tax bill we send out, most people send in the money, but behind all of that, under the hood, is send us this money or we will take it from you. And then we turn around and we get to be generous with it. And I've never been impressed with somebody who is generous with other people's money. it has never felt right. Again, I'm baffled. After 2 full sessions of this in the last 15 months, I don't get it.
So let me ask you this, Steve. Let's assume that the organizations that we do give money to weren't there. Would we be a better community for the small amount of dollars that we're giving away?
I believe in the private market, and I believe in nonprofits, that's a private market unless they are writing government grants to us, to Salem, to Astoria, to Washington, DC.
You don't see this as a government grant?
That's what I just said. Yes, I see this as a
Okay.
government grant, and getting involved in supporting private charities that if they were not there, if they were not able to raise funds, if the 7,000 people in Seaside can't see this as a good benefit to Seaside, and that project dies because they're funding other projects, I think those projects should move forward. Again, it feels amazingly arrogant that I would sit in judgment of other people's money and say, I'm gonna give away your money for you because I know better than you how to give away your money. We already have a mandate to run all these projects in the city, and the parks and the streets and the lights and the police and.
So you expect that
That
that people are gonna send a quarter to this charity and 50 cents to that charity and?
I think it's their money. They get to do what they want with it without us taxing it away from them and giving it to somebody in their name. That feels very wrong
Kathleen?
to me.
Well, I kind of took a little bit different attitude this time. I thought, this is people's tax money, and I'm gonna try to vote things that are gonna increase the property value of the people who have paid the tax money, like getting the homeless out of here, because that drags our property values down. So that's kind of how I looked at it this time, is people have paid from their homes this money for taxes. That money should go to help raise the value of their homes.
Chris?
I have a little bit of a twist on what you were saying, Steve. I moved here because Seaside is special and unique, and I think this is one of the things that makes it special and unique, so I absolutely adore that part. I also have the other side of my, Jekyll and Hyde, that came from a city that wasn't allowed to give funding to nonprofits because it is a government entity. And we certainly were allowed to do a lot of grant work around economic development and business development to enhance the city, to support the taxpayer investments, to do all those things around business and economic development, but not nonprofits. Along the same lines of some of the things you were saying. So I guess, I see kind of both sides to it, but it does feel like there might be other opportunities to think about if grants are something that the city wants to do, are there other areas where grants should be or could be offered to people too?
Like our tourism grants?
Things like that, yep.
And there's the tourism grants, we know what the purpose of those are, and they follow that purpose, even to the point of the grants amounts are smaller for things that are gonna happen during the high season, because we're not looking to attract more tourists during the high season. You said a couple words that resonated for me, and it kind of brings in what Kathleen said, and that is enhancing the community for the taxpayers. I took some of your words, and that's sort of the basis that I look at, and some of those things are relieving some of the work or the responsibilities that we have with city staff, but we're looking at the taxpayers in general as opposed to smaller groups. I want to share with you just an experience I had. I think it was the first year I was on the budget committee. Sunday supper has always been a difficult one for me. I believe in feeding the poor. I believe in food programs. But I don't believe in us giving money to churches and to privately owned houses. And I think you've all been able to see that as you've heard me speak. I was speaking sort of against the Sunday supper request because it wasn't for food. It was for an enhancement of the infrastructure at the church. And I won't say who said it, but I was highly surprised and quite embarrassed by someone lashing out at me and saying, well, you've never been hungry a day in your life. You remember that, don't you, Becky? Yeah. And I would hope that we never have those kind of attitudes about each other or about the city, etc. I think that we're all coming from the perspective of what is the best for the city and for the use of our taxpayers' dollars.
That would be the hope.
I'd like to chime in here. I listened to Steve's point. It was great because it was very contrarian to, I think, what we all have really thought of this as, and it makes a lot of sense in one aspect. But the only thing that I'm always leaning towards with the funding of the nonprofits is food, because let's say we have this vibrant economy, but we have this underclass that can't eat. Well, we're going to have society completely break down. Now, housing and stuff, they can sleep in tents, and there's things they can do there. But when people can't eat, that's when I think things get very bad for everybody. So that's where I have a soft heart for people getting fed. I feel like people should get food and water and, to a limited point, shelter. But after that, I think there's a great point that Steve made, like, what are we getting into at that point? And we start supporting other things that are kind of out of those basic needs that people need.
That's another good phrase, basic needs.
And personal responsibility.
Any other comments?
I'm just gonna throw out that as a recipient of the funding in Seaside Kids, it's all for us. We use that money for the safety of all the children in this area. And would come back again asking, based on safety and concern that the children are protected and safe and learning and mentored. And there is, there's a lot of opportunity for grants out there. You can go to all these different, but you can only keep asking the same people over and over and over again to help fund things. And Seaside Kids, Rotary, and Kiwanis, and et cetera, asking your business, and your business, and your business, and your business. There is a limited amount of money in this town of 7,000 people.
Well, I want to first thank you for bringing up the question, because I think asking the question is a really good place to start. One thing that just is occurring to me too is around, like, data speaks volumes, and outcomes and metrics can be really important in things like this. So maybe that's something to think about as we move forward, is what kind of outcomes can we use to prove the value of the investment that the city is making for things going forward, and do we need to get more, strict, for lack of a better word, about what really happens with the money.
My thought around Seaside Kids or 4-H or whatever those organizations are, these organizations keep kids from causing trouble. They keep them busy. They keep them with good role models. They keep them, off of the streets. And I see that as an investment in our community's future, as opposed to just feeding somebody today. And that's why I don't have an issue with any of those funding, because if kids are in those activities, they're not doing other things.
Well, I don't have a problem with them my grandkids are in 4-H, my son was in 4,
Yeah.
good organization. It's just buying the meals at fair, because my grandkids have been in 4-H for 20 years, and they bring their food with them. You don't have to have your troop get all your meals at the fair provided for you.
No doubt.
That was my problem with it.
16 kids.
Yeah, 16 kids out of 83 in, I can't remember if it was 83 in the
86.
county, 86 in the county or the city. And if we look at that, if we look at any of the organizations, now, Seaside Kids is open to any kid in this city. Is 4-H open to any kid in this city?
But isn't
Sure.
Seaside
I
Kids
don't know.
funded through
Yes, it
the
is.
businesses? Because we're not giving any money to them.
We aren't.
We didn't have spring.
It's been several years since Seaside Kids
The
came.
businesses are very generous.
Well, I'm grateful that we've had the conversation, and I think we should each continue to think about it. Because we're just beginning the budget process, and while we have, FY '25 awarded amounts, these are not awarded yet. We haven't gone through the budget process, so if Steve?
May I ask a related question on the nonprofit stuff? If we're going to do that, then my question would be, can we put some kind of framework around this or develop a methodology? I don't mean to complain for those of you that have been doing this for years, but this is one of the most painful processes I've been through twice. It's like everybody that stands up here is in a bubble, and we start from ground zero, and they're standing there all by themselves. And of course, everybody has wonderful projects, and there's nothing to measure it against. If we put a little bit of framework around it, if we talked sometime this month and before Zach sent out letters next spring and said, we're gonna do 35% as food banks and 30% housing and 15% youth, 10% emergency services or something like that. And we can say no capital project expenses, right? Nobody fixing up somebody's house or building. No administration, only it wouldn't take that long to put some kind of thing in there that would make it a whole lot easier to say, this is what we're looking for and fit inside that box. And then the other thing is, can we come up with a budget ahead of time rather than say, okay, this year they asked for $250,000, next year they asked for $4 million, and can we say, here's our number? Staff kept saying, can you keep it below last year, And then once everything's awarded, you say, okay, well, we've awarded this much, but we already picked a number like here, so we just roll everybody down, and somebody gets a letter that said, well, we wanted to give you $6,000, but it only worked out to $3,100 because everybody had to take a cut, Anyway, some kind of framework, I think, would make the process a little more structured.
I feel like we have quite a framework around it.
I do.
Okay.
I think we could use more framework. I'm not sure we could do it for this budget season, but this item on our budgets, on the city budget, is kind of ignored all year long, and then all of a sudden, wham. And part of why I know this is because the first few years I was on the budget committee, I said things like, why aren't we asking for income statements? Why aren't we asking for what were your expenses, your budget, and what's your budget for the next year? And it took me several years, and I designed a letter and the whole bit to get it through our staff, former staff, okay. And that started a bit of a framework for us to go to. But I think that we, in the meantime, between now and the next year's budget, should pay attention to something like this. And I see that possibly as part of the work of a budget committee.
I just did a quick calculation. We're spending quite a bit of time on 0.3% of the budget. I hope we're that excited about the rest of it.
Yeah, that's the point I would like to make is we spend all this time on these nonprofits and we have this giant budget that just gets skipped over when that's really the meat of what we should be focusing on. The 40 million or the 60 million number.
Yeah.
What calculator did it?
I think part of that is because that is the most humanistic part of our budget.
Yeah.
And that's where you spend your time and energy on human beings.
And I think it is a good conversation to have, even if it's 1% of the budget, because it's taxpayer dollars, and we're doing this process every year, which is basically outside of the budget process that runs the city.
That's right.
This is a giving process, and I think we need to be aware of what that is.
Well, look at the joy we get from watching Zach squirm when we're doing this.
Well, there's that too.
Just progressively more and more, you know?
All right, so let's move on. I hope that the budget committee can convene and have discussion around maybe the application process for next year and maybe clarifying that a little bit more. Okay?
Maybe that is for our council, maybe that's a future work session discussion that we invite the budget committee to. If we do want to add some more specifics, or if we want to make any modifications to that process. So I appreciate all that discussion. Jumping into our budget, in a second I'll turn the time over to Zach. We've been working pretty long on this, especially Zach putting in many extra hours to do this. I just want to appreciate him. There's a lot of work that goes into it, and I think we are slowly, I think, getting things the way we'd like to see them. Some of that will happen when we have a new finance system. There's some things that Zach, I'm sure, will talk about that are in the way we do things that make it more complicated. They're inherently tied to our financial system. So we've already selected a vendor on that, and we're hoping, I'm still trying for January.
Fingers crossed.
Early next year to have that implemented. So I'm looking forward to that. So he and I are working on this presentation together. I will give you a heads up that I have picked something up and I'm slowly going downhill throughout the day. So I am gonna stay in the back and let Zach run. He and I are on the same page on all this. I will just jump in if he or you are getting out of control. And
Likely.
if I need to leave, slip out a little bit early, you'll know why. With that, I'm just gonna turn it over to Zach and get this discussion going.
Before I start, anyone else need a printed? I got one more printed copy if anyone else wanted one. Takers? Now that I've bullied you into taking the printed copy. So yeah, thank you everyone for donating your time and being here and being dedicated to this process with the city. I think, you know, it goes without saying, I don't want to put words in anyone's mouth, but the participation that we get from the community, and you guys there aren't a lot of other places outside of the state of Oregon. The state of Oregon, it's kind of unique in how it develops its budget. So I think this is a good process, and I thank you all for being here and being part of it. With that, so you guys have all had this document in your hands now for at most 2 hours, so I expect you to know all of it by now. So the intent of this, of today, is really to stay high level, give you guys some of our methodologies, how we went along, or how we went about recommending the document that's before you. Some of the things that are included in it, we highlighted some stuff. So that you can see when you're going through why some numbers might be a little bit different than they were last year or what have you. By and large, and I think I have another slide about this, but by and large, the approach that we took to this process was to keep everything as similar as possible to last year. And so that's far more possible for discretionary items like if you break down our budget, it gets broken down into categories, right? So you've got personnel, you've got materials and services, you've got capital, and then you've got a laundry list of other things that are kind of indirect expenses that are tied to the individual funds. Transfers, interfund loans, debt payments, things like that. So, all of that is to say that the discretionary items, it's a lot more possible in certain sections than it is in others. We know a lot of what's gonna happen in personnel. We don't know all of it, but we know a large portion. So we're able to project that better at this point in time than we are some other items. But probably getting ahead of myself here. So, quick overview. So total sources of funds, that includes beginning fund balance plus projection of revenue for next year. Totals out to about 88.5 million.
As a reminder, because you're speaking a little bit of finance speak, beginning fund balance, that's our way of saying our reserves, our savings.
And that does not include interfund transfers back and forth. All the transfers that happen between the 44 funds we have. Total uses of funds is all of the various expenditures that are in this document before you today. That is the ceiling. That's a good way to think of it. It will come in far below that number in all likelihood because it's not possible for every department to spend every dollar we've allocated for them. It's just not. Barring catastrophe, in which we call this, we call this body back to session and say, hey guys, this is what happens. We need to make some decisions in a supplemental budget. That's the ceiling. Then when you get to, we had some discussion last year about doing our best to strip out the transfers and the interfund loans and the things like that inflate our budget. And so doing that this year brings us to actual expenses of about 37 million.
And we've been asking for that number for a while. To be able to go and say how much.
It's a complicated number to get to because you start having this internal dialogue where you're going, okay, well, do I include this and then not include this? Like one of the circumstances that I came to was, okay, well, do I include transfers that are coming out of the Tourism Activities Fund? All that fund exists for is to operate as a pass-through to other parts of the city. And I landed on yes in places because it doesn't actually expend any of it. There's 8 other places that pushes this money through that actually do the expending of that money, whereas there's 75% of the other transfers between all the funds you can kind of cut out and do that type of thing. So, in all fairness, it is a complex number to get to, and this is a great place for me to plug. And start planting the seeds to collapsing the funds down. This is ultimately a council decision, but the more that we can collapse our funds in on each other, there's certain places where we can't do that, but the more we can collapse them down on each other, the less need there is for transfers in and out, the less complex our budget at the end of the day will be.
Can I also add, Zach, if for those of you who have your budget document open, if you go to page 8, you can see, I think this is something that was asked for last year. When you strip all these extra things out of there that distort the appearance of the size of the budget, that's where you can see. So that page 8, adjusted summary of expenditures overview goes through each fund that we have, and you can see that the plan is we're budgeting for expenditures of about $37 million. That being said, because of all these transfers and everything else, what actually appears in the budget document is 57. But because of those transfers, it doesn't tell the true story. But also, so when Zach talks about collapsing funds, what we're talking about is, how many funds do we have, Zach?
45.
45 funds, and we should have 15 or something.
Well, less than 10.
Yeah. So it basically, I think in the past we've used different funds to separate the money so it's not touching each other. But when we have a computer software that can do that, it tracks it, not basically separate like checking accounts, if you will. So, anyway.
Well, Zach mentioned the word inflate, but I think what you said, distort, is actually a better word, because that 57 million isn't the real number. It's 37 million, and that's just transfers moving around, and it's just an accounting thing. From a layman's perspective, the 37 is the number.
If someone on the street were to stop me and say, hey, how big is Seaside's budget? I'd say 37 million. This is the number that I report to the county and the state, but that's not anything that anyone else. It's in your book, but that's more for my information than anything. Okay, so today's topics. So we'll talk a little bit about the general fund today, what's included in it. As a quick reminder, as of right now, this point in time, our general fund consists of, I know it's confusing, but an actual fund called the general fund, the public safety fund, the community development fund, and public works. And so it gets more complex than that. But that is, when I say general fund, that's what I'm referring to for the day. And then we'll touch a little bit about capital expenses that are included in the document. And then a little bit, this is my optimistic hope of what our future discussions might look like. And we'll go as far as we need to, of course. But next week, we've already noticed it. There's time for public comment for this budget, for the road district budget, which is at the end of this document, revenue sharing, and I want to say there's one more item that we have to accept public comment on. That's why the walls will be open for all of the people that will come in here and talk to us next week. So we'll do that, and then start the discussion on enterprise funds next week. So water, sewer, convention center, visitors bureau, though that's not as much anymore. We'll touch on some of the more business type endeavors that the city has and the budgets that are related to that. Then on the 17th, if possible, we'll wrap up and adjourn this body. It's optimistic, right? If we had to go to the 24th, we could. I work here, so my time is available, but of course it's all dependent on you guys. All right, so getting into a little bit of philosophy with the document that's before you. Like I said before, and I started down a slide that I had another slide on, but we tried to keep this document as much the same as last year's document. There's a few notable exceptions to that. Public safety. We pulled, for all intents and purposes, 911, we pulled that out of the police department. The reason being is when it's commingled with the police department, the reporting structure will not change. Mitch and the dispatch will still report to the chief of police, but as it sits commingled with the police department, it makes it incredibly difficult if the city wants to go for any sort of a state grant or anything that's associated with 911, emergency communications, anything like that, because I can't, with any level of accuracy, tell you what the expenses are. I can tell you what the expenses are for the police station, but if someone came to me and said, hey, we want this grant for 911, can you run our expense list? It would take myself and my staff going through every expense line by line and going, okay, this is for the police department, this is for 911. And so this gives us a better idea of what's actually associated with our 911 system. See, personnel updates are in there. Cost of living, there's some placeholders in there. Health insurance, we've got the word from CIS that our health insurance is going to increase by no more than 10%. So right now 10% is in there. fingers crossed that that number comes down at some point closer to the fiscal year, but we know that it's gonna be no more than that. And then there's a bit of an increase for retirement contributions that we'll touch on a little bit later. Debt payments, if there's any change in debt payments year over year, that has changed in your book. Revenue and expenses, so there's now within the fire department, there's now a revenue line and an expense line that's associated with the ambulance, so we can see the revenue that is associated with it as well as the expenses that are associated with that item. And then we'll go through the budget requests that we got from the various departments and what Spencer and I recommended that are reflected in this. And then a couple other minor items. By minor,
Yeah.
please avoid this one. But so there is a $1.2 million charge in the Visitors Bureau for the purchase of a potential purchase of the estuary property. That will supplement our ARPA funds that need to be spent by the end of the year. So that is the city's contribution toward that project.
Just because I'm sure people want to know, calendar-wise, we're shooting for an end of May or beginning of June, last meeting of May or beginning of June to bring this to the city council. It's all tied together. There's an approval of a purchase, there's an approval of a new short-term rental ordinance, and approval of a street vacation that all need to happen at the same meeting. Now, I don't know if that ends it and we can purchase it, or if that allows us to start the process of doing title work and things like that. So there is a chance this all could be paid out of this year's budget. We'll see. I'm going to tell Zach not to budget for it this year, and then on June 30th, I'll say, never mind, stick it back in before the end of the year, just to mess with them. But we are hopeful that that is coming along slowly but surely.
If we do pay for it in this year's budget period, do we have to go back and do an amended budget for the current fiscal year?
I need to check. I believe that I budgeted it in this year in case we spent it this year, because we knew about it at this point last year. So my gut tells me that we got it budgeted somewhere, but I need to go back and check.
If not, we do anticipate doing amending that budget at the last meeting in June, just crossing T's and dotting I's. Yeah, to make sure we're in compliance with everything that gets reported to the state. So we'll know by then.
Then you can see in fire, we've got the revenues and expenses associated with the ambulance. Downtown maintenance district, our costs associated with that contract have increased by 3%. So that's the variance there.
But that gets charged back to the businesses.
Correct. Yep. It's just it is a difference in terms of expenses in the document. Then we've got the airport. This item was actually a new item for this year. We're doing this anyway, and we're ending up paying for it out of, typically it's Public Works or elsewhere. So let's just put a line item in the airport so that we can account for it somewhere.
Can I ask a question about that? Given that the airport is there to mainly bring people in, is there any ability to use some tourism funding for that?
Only for promotional events, and it has to go specifically for people coming for that. So we have applied for grants in the past and done events for.
Well, I'm not meaning applying to tourism for a grant. I'm meaning the cost of maintaining the grounds at the airport.
Once again, like Spencer will tell you, they're very, very strict about.
So yeah,
That's why we have.
there's we can look into it. There are two purposes. You can use transit lodging tax either to promote tourism, or it says for tourism facilities, and that would be our convention center, that would be our visitors bureau, and with some some other minor things that we've designated as that. Whether or not the airport could qualify, I think we'd want to, before we get out too far, see if that's a common practice or not. But if it is, I think we're more than happy to budget it that way.
Economic development, so Cedar came and did their annual talk in December, if I remember correctly, and they had mentioned at that meeting that they were going to increase from 12,000 to 13.5 the portion or the allocation that they were asking for. So that's that item. This is a quarter of the payback from the loan that the new fire levy took as working capital from the convention center. And then
Do you want to explain the background on why that happened and how?
Yes. So I don't know how far back. I know it's at least 6 years. The fire department has been going to the public and asking for fire levies to supplement their operation. The problem, I don't know, the logistical problem in terms of funding that you get into is that you don't necessarily want to wait 5 years until you've collected all of the tax funds if the public is so generous to approve that request. So what we do is we, as the fire levy borrows working capital from elsewhere in the city and then agrees as those tax funds come in to pay that back. It's a 0% loan, so it's moving money from the left hand to the right hand, but in essence, that money needs to be paid back to the place that we borrowed it from. And then the American Rescue Plan, so this is actually a revenue item. That is the amount that revenue is increased because of the amount of money that's sitting in the bank account. So our auditor, when I was going through the process last year, said, why was your interest in the city bank accounts, why was it $75,000 in 21 and it's 1.6 million this year? And I said, well, you went from 0% in a check in a state-sponsored checking account to now they're giving us 5.2%. We've got $40 million in there, and so that starts to generate a fair amount of revenue that we can then allocate across the city. So,
could I make a comment?
Absolutely.
And go back a page? And that is the emergency communications, the dispatch being segregated, and the ambulance being segregated. I want to commend you on that. I think that's really good from another perspective, and that is because, if I'm correct, both of those areas not only serve Seaside, the city, but serve or potentially serve outside the city. And I think that gives us a really good idea of what that's costing the city on a better, a more accessible basis.
right, absolutely. Okay, so that brings us to city revenues. So you can see in fiscal year 24, we budgeted about 13.7 million. And at this point in time, we estimate that we're going to take in 36.1. That uses a methodology. I talked a little bit about it last year, but it basically, it takes the individual revenue lines and it breaks them out on how much you gather in terms of a year. So as we sit here in, let's just take room tax, for example. Say on your average year, at the end of March, you would have, on average, accepted 70% of your room tax revenue for the course of the year. Then you can take whatever it is that you received and you can divide it by that and imply what you're supposed to be at the end of the year. So that uses that methodology in places where it didn't make it look absolutely ridiculous. So I applied that and then went through and said, well, that's not going to happen. And so there's a few places that I went through and hand adjusted. But as of right now, that's what we estimate with a quarter left in the year. You'll notice I figured this question would come up, so I did some research. But the fiscal year budget for revenue is $3 million less than fiscal year '24. The reason for that is because this number is inflated by loans. It's so I have to, when one fund loads another fund money, you've got to count that as revenue. It's a little bit different than, in my mind at least, and this could just be a me thing, but it feels like a transfer is just kind of, for lack of better words, a shell game. But if you're loaning another fund money on the implication that they have to pay it back, then the receiving fund needs to count that as revenue.
But doesn't the loaning fund count that as expense?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
They don't have that as an asset as opposed to an expense? Like if I was loaning you money,
Yeah.
I would have an asset of a receivable.
Until you actually received the money.
Right.
Like, yes.
So it wouldn't be an expense. It would be just a change of classification of the asset.
Yes. In theory, yes. Practically, that's not how we've done it, but it is in accounting speak, right? But we've basically budgeted it as if it's going to happen, and then went back, and if it didn't happen, well, it just kind of didn't happen. So that's the difference between these. There's a few places there where we expected that we were going to do something. The water tank was a big one. We expected that we were going to push $900,000 from the convention center into the water department to refurbish the water tank. Plans have been altered on that slightly, and we'll talk about that, but there are some opportunities through the state that might be more advantageous than doing that specifically. So that's a conversation that we'll have.
So you don't see the offset of that loan in the overall budget?
It should zero out.
Yep, it'll zero out when you look at the budget as a whole, but just speaking about just talking about the revenue piece, if you take it, yeah.
If you're looking year over year, that's where it gets confusing. Hey, we brought in 3 million more revenue, then next year it dropped off. What's going on here? If you're looking year to year, it won't make as much sense, but it does, those funds zero each other out.
Yeah, and you'll see a little bit of a similar picture here, right? So this is the expenditure picture. So last year our budget was 40.8 million. And again, this is eliminating transfers and contingencies and that type of thing that distort the budget a touch. We estimate that we're gonna come in shy of that. And then next year we're proposing at this point a $36.4 million budget. So you can see the offset, right? A little bit less revenue, but also less expenses. And so you can kind of see the practical.
So I noticed that in where it was listed in there for the last 4 or 5 years, that our expenditures were more than our revenues. Is that an ongoing problem, or is that something we should be expecting?
It's not a problem.
Because if I look at 36 here and 31 on the revenues, okay, where are we at?
So the next, there's a slide, I think it's.
Stop getting ahead.
Well, so we all know how to look at it when it comes up.
So let me come back to you. Let me come
Okay,
back to you
yeah,
on that.
sure.
And so speaking about revenues, I know that Clatsop County predicts that it will lose X number of $1 million due to the forestry plan. Do we know how much the city will lose with that forestry plan?
I will, so.
We don't receive that revenue.
Right.
It's only the county?
County, I think school districts are the other ones.
Okay.
That was what I
That's good.
thought the answer
We
was, but
can
I.
lose indirectly though.
Yeah, exactly, because
but not
nobody's
directly.
spending it.
Cities aren't in that. We never got any to start with.
So, now to answer your question. So, Spencer and I's philosophy for for operational expenses, that's payroll, materials and supplies, repeat capital requests. The one that comes to mind the most often is a new police vehicle, because we tend to do that pretty often. Our philosophy with that is that revenues coming in need to meet or exceed the amount of those operational expenses. So that goes to your answer of expenses have been higher than revenues for several years. You're right, but the way that Spencer and I put this together is we looked at we stripped out all the one-time costs and then look at ongoing costs as a measure of actually figuring out whether we're in a good spot or not.
So I would describe it as, we want to make sure that the expenses to operate the city for this year are going to equal the revenue that's coming in, and that we're not spending our savings account for new personnel or new services that have an ongoing cost that we don't have a revenue source identified for. That being said, we will strategically spend some of those reserves for one-time projects, pieces of equipment, public improvements, things like that don't have an ongoing cost. That's a good use. We're not here to sit on a pile of cash in the bank. We want to be careful with our funds and have an emergency fund there. But so we've gone through this to ensure that we don't exceed that, because one of my complaints is that the state law requires us to budget our beginning fund balance. So we are required to say, this is how much we're starting in savings, here's how much we anticipate getting in revenue, and these are all the resources. This is the total amount of money we can use this year. And my problem with that is you can really easily start distorting that and start getting in a position where what it costs to operate the city exceeds what you're bringing in annually, and you're relying on that. I don't want to get there. And so we've been very careful as we go through that. In fact, I think this budget is very heavy on one-time purchases, one-time projects, and much more lean on things that are ongoing as we look forward ahead over the next couple of years.
So if I'm understanding right, when we get back to it or get down into it, we will see that $5 million variance and be able to pick out the one-time expenses that are accounting for that, and then we can determine where that is. Okay.
Yep.
And those are drawing down the.
So they would be using, balance or savings,
And a lot of those are built up by, as Zach talked about, we're not in a situation where we tell our departments, if you don't spend your money, you lose it, we're going to reduce your budget or something like that. We want them to make wise decisions, and we try to budget our revenues low, budget our expenditures high, and that gives us a little more flexibility, a little more comfort. And the hope is, if we don't spend it, if we don't need it, that there is savings at the end of the year. And then my goal is basically to use that, not just to stick in the reserves, but we start rolling that over into capital so we can start putting it into our streets, our parks, and other improvements like that. But that's really how that fund balance is built up over the years, is by doing that, and that we hope to continue to do that, and that being a revenue source for some more investment into the infrastructure of our community.
There's a tendency in a lot of places that a lot of governments with fiscal years, folks at the head of the departments that have the ability to spend money will get to the end of the fiscal year and go, oh, I've got $250,000 that I'm just going to give away if I don't spend this. And so what Spencer and I are trying to do is create incentives that stop that, right? So I'll skip ahead on one item. Mike Dimmick has been, his fleet of vehicles is in fairly rough shape. He's been asking us for vehicles for a couple years now, since he started. And so that would be a great incentive for him to not rush out in May and go, I need to build up my inventories and do all this, or I'm gonna lose all this money. If he knows that at the end of the year, if he doesn't spend, 40 grand, he may be able to buy a new truck with the savings. It just creates a little bit of an incentive to not get to that point where you're just spend at the end of the year. So that's part of the hope there too. And you will see, we've got a lot of one-time expenses. I'm gonna try to figure out how to say this. There was a bottleneck of investment into infrastructure for a few years that I think Spencer and I are, if we're driving an ocean liner, you can't turn that on a dime, and we're trying to get there. So some of the things that we're going to allocate money to this year is a pavement. You're gonna have to help me with this pavement preservation plan. Is that how you say it?
Pavement preservation program.
Thank you. I always know it's got 3 P's, but I always mess up the last 2. Where a company comes out and looks at all of our streets and says, these ones are in the best shape, these ones are in the worst shape. And the way that prior to Spencer's credit, we've got money to improve Spruce Street right now and Beach Street that we received from the state. Beach Street specifically because it's in rough shape. And Spencer put the brakes on that a little bit and said, well, let's take a look at all of our streets, because if for the cost, and if I'm describing this wrong, please feel free to step in, because for the cost of tearing up and redoing Beach Street, you could probably go and fully repair 40% of the other streets in the city, right? So, do you keep very good conditions on 80% of your streets at the expense of 20 or what have you? It's kind of the way that he described it to me, which made complete sense. So,
Yeah,
would you add to that at all?
I think they can kind of show scientifically that your money is best spent preserving the good streets you have and then slowly working your way on the bad ones, rather than putting all your money in the bad ones and letting your good streets wear away. And so we just need to get that analysis, and they'll help us prioritize those.
When cars fall in, then you have to really jump on it.
No, that's the patch.
So the hope is that you'll see some of those investments in. So personnel costs. I touched about that a little bit earlier. We know cost of living generally. So we're currently in negotiations with the Public Employees Union. So that 3.5 is a placeholder in there. I was supposed to take out the equal to the inflation index, but that's basically what we benchmark against. In an ideal world for me, it would be, we would just tie all cost of living to those, but when you're working with 2 different unions that have different wants and needs, that's a little bit difficult to do. Retirement contributions, so over time, our standing with, I guess, and it's a confluence of circumstances in the pension. The way that the pension works is you've got, I'm gonna get too technical. What we need to do is get to a better place where the city has funded a specific amount of future projected liabilities, meaning you've got the body of employees that work today, and that body of employees, based on their tenure and their salaries and so on and so forth, they generate a liability that the city will have to pay at some point. Spencer and John and I have been in talks with the Standard, who runs our pension program, and we've made a few adjustments to increase the return that the pension generates. The allocation was odd, and so we've changed a little bit of that so it better fits the assumptions that the pension was making. And then we had a couple bad years where there were bad stock market returns, and our asset allocation exacerbated that. And so as it stands right now, I'm going to be guessing, Spencer, maybe you remember this off the top of your head. I think we stand at about 62, 65%. And we'd like to get closer to 80 to be comfortable. So in talking with the Standard and their actuaries, the number that they gave us to do that, and now this is a longer term item, was about 30.4. I increased that to 30.5 just to hopefully get there a little bit faster. But the hope is that realizing a few years of better returns in the stock market, and then a few years, and by a few years, it's probably mid to long term, but I'd say 5 to 10 is what I would plan on of contributions at this point. At that point, we'll hopefully be in a better position to be able to look at it and say, okay, well now we're funded at the level we should be funded at. And we can then hopefully reduce that to better align with how the pension is standing.
Yeah, I anticipate that may go up. We're gonna be a bit of a curve where we gotta get over the hump, and then with the eventual goal of that contribution rate starts to come down quite a bit. I'd love to see it closer to 20% or under sometime soon, because it's very expensive.
Wasn't that 65% quite a bit lower last year? Didn't we make a bump last year to help?
No, we haven't made any. Well, last year
One change.
The one change we've made, I think it was last fall, is we made a change where, I don't know why they did this. On January 1st of each year, they do a calculation of everyone's wages, and then starting in July, that's what is contributed. So if someone's making $50,000 a year, and let's for sake of it, it was 25%, then 25% of that salary of the $50,000 or their monthly paycheck starts coming out. And the problem is if they had a raise in those 6 months, it was already, yeah. So we changed it so what I think it should have been all along, which is it's just a flat contribution. There's not a point in time of we take a snapshot and this is the wage. It's as wage changes happen, it's automatically changed. So if it is 30.5%, someone gets a raise, cost of living, it's always 30.5%. So that's the one change we made in the fall, and then more recently, we based on the recommendations of their actuaries, made some changes to the investments. The main thing being is that the old plan was contingent upon us receiving like a 6% return. That was the assumption. And the investment portfolio was such that it was only expected to bring back a 5.5% return. So I don't know how we ever got into that situation, but we've rectified that so that the investment return matches the investment return.
Expected.
Yes, the expected return. Yeah.
Were you below 65 last year? Did those things make any
Yes.
improvement to bump you up to?
I want to say we were closer to 60 last year, maybe in the high 50s. I think the collection of increased contributions and better stock market performance have bumped that up a touch.
I haven't seen any updated numbers yet, and those changes are kind of small potatoes, I think, compared to what this is going to do. And this is a placeholder based on a discussion we had earlier. We do want to fine tune it and make sure it's on the right path, and so that's why it's in there at that. But we don't want to delay kind of getting the retirement on track to where it needs to be.
And then we talked a little bit about CIS giving us their no greater than amounts. I'm hopeful that that number comes down, but right now that's the assumption that we have. So if indeed it does come down before this process ends, then I'll reflect it in that document and send out a new one. And if we get a number that's lower than that prior to the budget being adopted by council, I can update it at that point, but it will be updated at some point. Okay, so talked a little bit about budget requests. So the process that we use for departments to come in and say, hey, this is a pain point for me, is in the fall of every year, I send out a form to all the departments and say, hey, if there's anything that you want to request, Mike is a great example. He needed vehicles, right? If there's anything that you would like to request that's not in your current budget, now is your opportunity. And so they get 6 weeks or so to put those requests together, and then they come before Spencer and I and say, hey, I requested X, Y, and Z, and this is why. And so what we do at that point is try to make sure that they're thinking of the big picture, and there is not some future plan that would hinder what they're requesting, right? So a good example would be last year, one of the requests was to replace the fuel station out at the Public Works yard. If at that point, so what we ultimately did, this is I'm diverting a little bit, but this is what we ultimately did was said, well, that fuel tank is actively costing us money. Like, it's leaking, the permits, we gotta go get new permits, we've gotta install a new fuel tank. So I took a look at whether it would cost us any more to just get a fuel card for the pumps north of these CFW, I think.
CFN.
At the north end of town, and they also get a card for Pacific Pride on the south end of town if they find themselves down there, or they need something that isn't offered at one or the other. Why would we maintain the infrastructure if it costs us no more to go get gas from that pump? They can let them maintain the infrastructure.
Yeah, we weren't saving any money on the price of
Right.
gas.
And so ultimately, I guess my point to this story is that if Mike requested a fuel tank and we knew at that point that we were gonna go to fuel cards, well, that's something that he needs to know that he might not have been privy to at that point, right? So we're trying to make sure that the requests that they have don't bump up against anything else that may be happening. And so that gives us a list of, Spencer and I and John, a list of items to go through and say, okay, well, based on council's priorities and the priorities of this body and then Spencer's priorities, here's where we think any extra dollars that we may have in the budget are best spent. So that brings us to this. So we've got recommended budget requests for public works, general fund, and public safety. I'll touch a little bit, and I'll send this out to everyone after this meeting so that you don't have to try to remember these. But for the general fund, a new camera in here. John had mentioned that there's a blind spot or they need to be updated or something.
We're starting to use this room more and more like a conference room. And we want to mount a similar camera right above this TV. So we're looking at the person, talking to the person when we're using in that case. I think if we are able to do that, this room is really set up to do a lot of different things.
Before you do that, I recommend you look into purchasing an owl. I think that'll do what you, that goes in the middle of the room and it turns. I've been in many meetings, both in the meeting and in the Zoom, and I've seen it at small city councils, very reasonably priced.
Okay.
I didn't mean to skip over this one. I was trying to figure out how to. I don't want to get too much into the specifics of an individual person, but there's a person on my team whose duties do not align with the job classification that, okay, there's only women that work for that she has. And so I would like to better reclassify that person to better fit to what she's actually doing. And then updating, or it may end up being a replacement. Spencer thinks it's gonna be a replacement. I don't know, I sit in the sauna in my office all winter long, so I know that the heating works, but we need to look at the HVAC system in this building. And
We spend a lot on calling people out
yeah.
every month to fix things and things like that. I think it was told to Kim many years ago it needs to be replaced, but we haven't done it, so.
So it's Band-Aid after Band-Aid with that system.
What's that?
It's because they're not trained to repair, they're trained to push and pull a new unit in.
Well, we now have a project manager on staff who is expert on kind of determining what needs to happen and finding the right contractor. And so we have some expertise to rely on, not, just taking that. But it's not in good shape. And it's original to the building, which is, what year, 88? 89.
So that covers everything for the general fund, the actual general fund of the general fund. Public Works, I've touched on work pickups. At this point, with your blessing, we'd like to get Mike's team a new pickup that he's not scared is going to break down. Storage facility at Public Works. When we built the new camping facilities out on Avenue S, we had to pull out a building that we stored things in there. And so as a result, we are running very, very lean on storage space, and we're having to keep some of our Public Works equipment out in the rain.
So it's not just, we have quite a bit of equipment that is stored outside. We also have received some equipment on grants where we got the equipment for free, but it needs to be stored inside. And there isn't a spot today, but we can get our equipment to last longer. The latest thing is that, maybe some of you have heard this, but many vehicle manufacturers have used some sort of corn product or in their plastics. Is it soy or something like that? And so we're getting rats from the mill ponds coming up underneath and eating through that plastic and into the vehicles. And so, for the protection of our investments, we just need to get. So this is like a large pole barn on the south side of the Public Works building.
The next one, so we also put one time, whether it's just a one-time expense in this fiscal year or if it's ongoing. This is the only ongoing one in Public Works. We have a backlog of projects that the streets team, and they're called the streets team because that's how they're labeled within my world, but it's really the Public Works team has that they just don't have the staff to be able to complete. And so this bolsters that team a little bit and helps us check a few more of those boxes and more rapidly respond to issues that the city has.
And I would say, we call it the streets department. They're really Public Works maintenance generalists and whatnot. They are very talented. The discussion we've been having is they really like to do projects themselves because they can save a lot of money, and they think the quality of the work is better. As an example, last year they re-roofed the restrooms at the convention center parking lot, and I think we were having active discussions of projects that need to happen, whether we should be doing it in-house or contracting out. And the employees would prefer to do it, but they keep saying, yeah, we'll find a time. The reality is that can't always happen, and so we're starting to look at, okay, what's the cost of contracting it out? And it would be cheaper for us to be staffed at the right level and continue what they have been able to do in the past. I think we will have more in savings than the position's going to cost. So I believe they're going to be building we're putting in as an example, we're putting in a generator for the, I don't know, what's your neighborhood called again? Thompson Falls. Because apparently they want to have their water even when the power goes off. So we're going to put a generator on the booster pump down there, and our staff plans on building, erecting the building that goes around that and doing that in-house. And so I think the cost savings on projects like that more than pay for this. Otherwise, you'll see I haven't been recommending any ongoing personnel ones, but this one I think is needed, required, and also can come with some potential savings.
What's the time frame on that building? Just curious.
You probably know better because I think they've started clearing and prepping the land. That's the last I heard, so I don't know anything more specific.
I don't know of a time frame, but I know that work has started at least. Pavement preservation plan, we talked at that one a little bit, so I'm not gonna delve too much. The public works roof, if you'll remember back to 11 short months ago, this was an item that was in this year's appropriation, sorry. And when Ed Arden, he's our new project manager that Spencer was speaking of, Mike handed him this project and said, hey, go get someone to re-roof our building. And he goes, you can't do it for that. And so this is in addition to, we appropriated 120 for it last year. He thinks it's gonna be closer to 300. So
I think, and
it makes that difference.
It may have been that the philosophy last time was to repair the roof, and looking at it, our money is much better spent on a replacement that gets us the next 20 years rather than 120,000 for some repairs that get us through the next 5 years. So.
The North 40 Park planning cost, that's in there. It's happening. So we included a cost in there for that. And then the HVAC system at the Public Works building is also on the fritz / non-existent, they would tell us. So this is some funding to get that looked at. Jeff Flurry would thank every one of you if you approved that. Then moving on to public safety. So the fire station renovation is going to cost us a little more than we had allocated last year. City Council, we've already spoken a little bit about this, but essentially where we're trying to get is to position the fire department so that they are better able to respond to emergencies in the future. If we have to, and this is all speculation and contingency planning and what ifs, right? But if we have to run our ambulance full time, we need space for those employees. If volunteerism continues to decline at the rate it is, then we need places for career staff to be. And so this is just like the roof, this is an addition to what we budgeted last year, which I believe was $1 million for that. So the total project, after you include the 1.7 million for the seismic upgrades for the fire station in your book, is about 3.2 million.
So I will say Joey and Ed have worked hard with the contractors to get the price down as much as possible, and it's down to they've taken all the things that they can do in-house after, and it's really to the things that would cost us more to do it later. So some of the things behind the walls and whatnot. And also some of this is just due to the construction inflation from when the project started and where we are today.
Okay, replacement of computer-aided dispatch. So, there's a bit of good news with this one specifically. The county, I believe it's the sheriff, received a grant to replace the computer-aided 911 uses two items. If I were to call into 911 right now, they would use the computer-aided dispatch system to dispatch whatever resource it is to me. So if I was, down, they would dispatch the fire department to come and see why I was, and that timestamps and does all the things that a 911 system has to do when they're in operation. Then on the other side of that, that CAD system enters items into what's called a records management system. It's the RMS system. That puts the basis of information in for the police or fire to enter their information. So that's the more detailed system, so that when 2 weeks from now insurance tries to figure out why I'm on the sidewalk out here, someone can give the answer to that, right? So the county got I want to say it's a little over a $500,000 grant to upgrade our CAD RMS system, Astoria's CAD RMS system, and I believe there's a third one at the sheriff's department, if I remember correctly, to do all the one-time installation costs for it this year. It's been a request that 911 has had for years, and our system is not, it's aged, is the best way to put it. And so this is something that the city was going to need to invest in at some point. There is an ongoing cost to having this. You can see the $50,000 there. I believe our current system already cost us somewhere in the realm of $30,000 annually to operate. So there's a little bit of an addition there, but it would be for a far more robust and efficient system. New patrol vehicles. So the police station requested, annually, I spoke a little bit earlier about replacing patrol vehicles. They're beat up, they're driven hard, they're driven on the beach. So we try to allocate, if the budget will allow us, about $80,000 to replace one of those every year. This year, the police chief requested that we get a second vehicle for Paul, so that he's got some ability to operate a little more efficiency.
Not a second vehicle, a replacement vehicle.
Replacement vehicle, yes.
He doesn't need two cars.
He doesn't need two cars. So, so that is the additional $45,000 on this one.
And when we replace a car, what do we do with the old car?
Give it to Public Works. It's been the past practice.
Yeah, that's what I figured.
That's usually what we do.
Good deal.
So if it's still operable, that's usually where it's destined.
And one of our plans, and it's on the list of things to do, is when we do our long-term capital planning, is to have a fleet replacement program. So we're projecting out the life of a car, when it needs replaced, and we're adequately budgeting each year for those replacements. So it's not up and down each year, but it's a steady amount, and the money's there when it's needed and things like that. And so on the list of things to do.
Replacing the dispatch desks, if there's a lot. If this body so decides, there's a lot of stuff in here for 911, but at this point next year, you would have a completely revamped and efficient 911 system. The chief came to me last week and said, hey, our radios are dying and we need to buy new radios. The city of Astoria got a quote for 8 radios. They don't need 8 radios. They were assuming that we would need some too. And so they got a quote for 8 radios, 4 of which would be destined for Seaside. That, in the chief's opinion, and I think it makes a lot of sense, we won't get a better deal on. So we don't necessarily need 4 radios, but if we were to go and ask them to rebid the project just for us, we would likely pay the exact same thing for 2 or 3 radios. And so,
I think the goal has been to get to 4, so that we have 4 dispatching stations that 2 are staffed, 3 are often staffed, and on occasion, the 4th one could be needed, or if the call volume continues to grow, will be used as much as the 3rd position is now. So as we've been looking at redesigning dispatch, the build out for our community would be to 4. And so we've talked about doing 3 and then adding a 4th, but sometimes when we look at those things, especially when they're coming once to do 1 installation, coming back to do the 4th one increases the cost significantly. And so just trying to look ahead.
yeah, and the
Can you
other,
go into more detail on those desks? I'm getting sticker shock there for $80,000 and the radios too. I mean, how is that a $450,000 purchase?
so these are radios that are specific, they're built by Motorola. They're specifically for the systems that are in police and fire vehicles, right? And so what they do, they're similar to what the military uses. They basically frequency hop, and they're all in sync. Sorry, I'm probably getting too technical on this, but that's why they're so expensive, because they all sync up and they frequency hop so that you or me couldn't get on just one of the general items that broadcasts and listen to emergency traffic.
So these aren't the radios that the patrol guys carry around on their vest?
No, they're the bigger units that are in our server room down at the police station. They're not the they're not the walkie-talkie versions. So that's why the radio specifically is so expensive.
And everything with dispatch, there's always sticker shock. And part of this is there's really only one player out there. And so there's not a lot of options to choose between. It's Motorola. I think we all have the same sticker shock on those.
Now the same system as Astoria.
I'd have to ask on that. I don't know the answer. I do know that in the past we have been able to interoperate. So right now, if we get overloaded with calls, they can go through, Astoria Dispatch can come on. And at certain times, about a year or 2 ago, when they couldn't get staffed right, they were able to bring their employees down here and work out of ours. So I suspect, but I don't know for sure.
Right. So that's another note with the radio specifically. That's the chief thought 4 would be helpful in case we ever get in a situation where we've got to cover, or Astoria is inoperable and that needs to come down here or what have you. I had another point that just escaped me, but
Talking about desks.
desks.
Maybe it would be helpful because I'll admit, I don't understand that.
I assume they include all the computer systems that have to go in.
There's a lot of things I think are included, but they're in a different one. But we were just talking about this today. You got desks, consoles, software, and what I think is one is really another one. And maybe what we can do between this meeting and the next meeting is get the police department to get a breakout. What are the 5 or 4 or 5 different things? What are they for? What are the role they play? What have we looked at for options? And help us understand why it costs so much.
So this is desks and equipment.
Yeah.
Okay, and
It
then.
might be better to change that word desks
Yeah,
to
that's what
what it really
Good.
is.
And then as far as the 911, it seems like we're putting a lot of money into 911. I should probably know this, but do we get any grants or anything that comes in to help us operate? Because
We get 911 revenue. So when you pay your cell phone bill and stuff like that, there's a part on there that goes, and that funding comes into the city for our dispatching.
And I probably should have noted that. Sorry, this is not coming out of, the only portion that'll come out of the actual general fund public safety fund is what is not covered by, we have a special revenue fund for 911 funds, and a large chunk of this will be covered in that fund, for what that's worth. But the other thing that I was gonna say about the radios, that was the point that escaped me. Motorola, if it's whatever company services our current radios, no longer services our current radios, and there are no more parts for them. And so when things break, we are now scavenging off of other radios to try to make them work again.
Purchasing parts on eBay.
Purchasing parts,
Oh,
actually,
God.
that's a true statement. They're purchasing parts on eBay, doing things like that to try to cobbled the system together. So we're fortunate that it's lasted this long, but it's time to get those.
But that's really what that special revenue fund is for.
Correct.
Is to fund.
It funds 1.05 dispatchers, and then the way that I look at it is it is a fund that basically acts as a capital fund. But it can only be used for 911 related purchases, so that's why it's its own thing.
And since we're the dispatch for Cannon Beach, out 26, we get money
That's a
from
good
all
point,
those different areas that are coming in.
Yes, Gearhart, so some of, where is it? Some of this cost will be billed out to Gearhart and to Cannon Beach because we also service those two areas, so we'll recoup some of that. I don't know that it's a lot of it, but it will be 40%.
And we do have ongoing charges to them. That's one of the things that we will look at is what's the cost operator dispatch and ensuring that we're billing them proportionally to their call volume and things like that.
Another good reason to split out the expenses and revenue for.
And the desk, I will get more information on the desks. I will admit, I know they're specialized desks. I know we have to pay someone to come in and install them, and there's wiring that goes throughout the whole thing, but I don't, like you, I think a desk is a desk, and it should cost a few $100. I know it's not that, but I'll get more information on that specifically. Let's see, where are we? The dog kennel. The dog kennel is Paul brought pictures to me. It leaks, it's cold, so we wanted to put 5,000 in to try to make it not do that. try to make it an okay place to put a dog if you have to for the night.
That's located out at the sewer treatment plant, and sometimes it's easier, more cost effective if we have a loose dog. Most of the time, we get a call within a day or two or something like that to pick it up, and we can just kennel it here locally and keep the animal licensing here. There are some talks we've had about just allowing the county to do it, but we're not ready to make any changes yet.
I had a question. We're putting all this, is some of those radios out of the tsunami zone, and we're putting all this money into a place that's right smack in the middle of the tsunami zone?
Yeah, there were discussions at one point about housing some of them up at our emergency operations center. Ultimately, the chief didn't want to do that. He's got better expertise of why than I do, but I believe it came down to span of control and like if something bad were to happen, he at least sees all the parties and doesn't have to run up to the EOC to try to get his arms around everything. But I agree with you. They will also be insured, so if something were to happen, we at least recoup that. But I mean, I think I was gonna say,
It doesn't help us if something happens.
yeah, if something, yeah.
Well, maybe when we get our vertical evacuation structure, we'll put some at the top of that.
There you go. Sorry, that's not a great answer to your question, but that's what I know. Do you know anything more about that, Spencer?
No, I'd have to talk to the chief, but I think right now our police department works out of facilities in the tsunami zone. That's the base of it. If you want to have a discussion and moving them outside of that, we can, but there's lots more to go. That would lots of other issues with that.
Yeah, those will just have an EPIRB on top.
Oh.
Going, here we are.
Here we are. As they float away.
You may not recognize anything around it.
But it might be something to think about in terms of a grant, of building a redundant system up there, even if it's one desk with one radio, just to have something up there.
We will have capabilities. So this is an aside, but we just updates for the EOC. We are our contract for our internet and phones is up this fall, and so we've rebid that out. And it looks like the provider we're likely going to go with, part of that package is to include fiber optic all the way up to the EOC, which means we can put an almost unlimited number of like phone banks up there and take that over. We have many redundancies. There's also that we work pretty closely with the, what do we call that? The ham radio club, and that part of what they do is provide a backup to a backup system too if all the other systems are out and stuff like that. So those are always things we are looking at, is how we can create more redundancy.
Let's see, firefighter into EMS division chief. So one of the items we found as we stood up the ambulance service here in Seaside is that there is a lot that's associated with running an ambulance that is outside of the scope of being a firefighter. And we were fortunate in that we had a member of the firefighting staff who is a paramedic and had previously worked on these before, and he stood it up for us. But the chief brought it to us outside of him bringing it to us, and then he came and talked to me, I don't know, probably a month ago, and said, look guys, you know, I did this for you, but this is well outside of my job description. And so the idea here is to reclassify someone to have a level of responsibility that can run that wing of the fire department specifically. I think that's as far in detail as I can.
Is there any revenue from the ambulance that offsets the
Yes.
increase?
Yep, there will be. Right now, it's too early to know exactly how much it'll be, but right now, I think 75,000 is what I've got in the budget, and I think that's conservative. I think if we are running efficiently, I think it could be well north of that. So that is backed by revenue. That's a great point. Increasing security measures at the fire station. The fire station wants to put in key card doors now that they have narcotics in there. They've already got the narcotics stored behind.
Don't go into too many details. This is going on YouTube.
Sorry.
They have them secured.
They have them secured. They want to increase the security by adding cameras to the exterior of the building and adding key lock or card key doors so that they know who's coming and going at any given time. And then the radios we touched on. And then here are some other items that were requested but are not included at this point in your budget. There was a request to combine 2 of our part-time library positions. I think, and if I'm putting words in your mouth, then feel free to tell me I'm wrong. But I think we're open to this. But as our contracts currently state, if we did that, we have to offer benefits, and so it makes the cost of the request about 3-ish times what it would be otherwise. And so we're working to reword some of that so that this might be a possibility, but right now with that it doesn't feel like it is. Would you add anything to that, Spencer?
No, I think that's an ongoing discussion. That's one of the things that we were talking about in the general employee contract negotiations. But yeah, that cost right there is the cost to add benefits to combining a 20-hour week employee and a 10-hour week position. Once we get over 20 hours right now, we have to add retirement, health insurance, and everything. And one of the things we're discussing is making that threshold 30 hours instead of 20.
If we do that, then the cost is already there. It's a pretty easy decision. Hiring a library intern, I think this is a discussion that is ongoing, so this, I'll let you speak on it.
Well, I can just go through this. I don't know if I necessarily want to go into the reasons. These ones have not been included, so there's an intern at the library, additional cameras and things at the library and City Hall, GPS system for utilities. That's something that we probably need down the road, but I don't think we're ready to do that yet. There's another position that we're re-looking at reclassifying in the police department, but I don't think we have done the necessary work yet for the justification on that, and so there's still some more work that needs to happen. There was a request about some incentives to be increased at the police department, and that's not something we're recommending. And there was an additional position requested in the fire department, and that we may come back and look at that as we look at our revenues within the ambulance. But right now, I'm not ready to take on that ongoing cost. They just recently, in the last year, got 2 new positions that are partly grant funded. I want to see what we can do with that. I do expect over the next 10 years we are going to need an increase in staffing, but not this year. So this may be a little bit of a forewarning that we're needing it, but that's not something I'm recommending at this time.
Okay. Then that brings us to capital. Sorry, this is way too small for you to read. I realize that. So take one, pass it around. Some there and some there.
Do you have a copy for me too?
Is there enough there?
This isn't in the packet we got.
This is not, no.
Okay.
But it will. On your slide.
It will be when I send the slides. So this is all of the things that we included in the budget last year and where we stand in terms of,
First old people.
I'll go photocopy.
Oh, I think there's enough. Perfect.
hey, look at that.
Do we want to take a 5-minute break? This is the last item we have for today, capital projects. Do we want to?
Yeah, it's good. It's a good time. Let's take a fun break.
Take a break.
How late are we planning on running tonight?
This is the last thing we have to talk, is
This
just
is the
walking
last
through these
item,
projects. As long as you want.
All night, let's just do it. Yeah, let's just get all the way through it.
Marathon time.
You're already working ahead anyway.
Infrastructure fencing.
Right, they didn't get the funding. Yeah. No. I don't think so. I think it was something through the state.
What's that?
The Avenue F, remember they were gonna, the culvert.
The schools were, the traffic.
Oh, you mean going
Not that
on the
culvert,
east side
but I meant
of the highway?
Yeah.
Up on Avenue S, they were gonna replace
Avenue
the
F.
Yeah, they
Bridge.
were.
They were gonna do the bridge too.
No,
the
bridge.
We had the $4 million bridge. Yeah, for that bridge on Avenue S?
It's a
When
lot
was that?
longer,
It's not even
it's a
a
lot
bridge.
longer than it looks. It's like 50 or 60 feet or something.
It doesn't look like a bridge, but it is.
When did we get that quote? How long ago was that?
Oh, it was about 3 years ago.
So it's about 8 million.
Yeah.
Probably is, actually. Soon to be triple.
Yeah, looks like Avenue S is gonna see if we get it. You guys still have money.
So the waste
Renewal district still doesn't have that much.
So the sewer replacement, or I mean the dryer,
an estimated spend in FY '24, remaining spend in '25, and then where it says currently in budget, is that FY '24 budget or FY '25 budget? I got a few questions so I can understand a little bit.
Anyway, I'm sure they get grants, but all the churches,
City Hall.
all of the churches come from each church.
You
The Love It Visit firm, they all put money in, and then one woman from each church navigates the homeless issue. And they're not homeless, except the ones who want to be homeless, and they have to live up in the mountains, and they can't encroach on any trail or public property where people are.
That's right.
Those can be 10, 12, 5:30.
Well, no, it's not 30. When I do it one as I volunteer at one as a sense of sense of church. Gotta go get the kids.
$5.15.
I hope so.
5:15 work.
Andy, the last person? Got his mail?
Oh, I'm guessing.
I finally went out and played that Seaside course. Did you? I brought my father-in-law there, and it was a wet day after they did cut grass. So my father fish and just roll 2 feet. We had a good time. Just the high school kids.
Been tall.
Oh, yeah.
Never fit under.
Is everybody back?
All right.
You're back, yay.
You got 20 minutes.
Yeah, I can do that.
20 minutes, yay.
Okay, so, we touched base on the general fund stuff, so the second item is capital. So a quick note about our philosophy with capital. So basically, the way that, it's hard to do this before we collapse funds, but the way that I would interpret a capital fund is something that we allocate, and then because of the way that capital is spent, they're larger projects that a lot of times take more than a year or span fiscal years. They become what's called non-lapsing funds. Now you have to request those funds every year in case to comply with Oregon budget law and so forth. But the way that I would approach it, and I think the way that Spencer would approach it, is that unless you guys tell us differently or a project falls off the list and we decide that we're not going to do it anymore, as you can see, some of these, my rationale's not up there. Some of these have, then we'll keep requesting these until the project is done, basically. So this gives you a list of the things that we appropriated in last year's budget and where we stand with everything. And so So there's several that have been done already in 2024, but the approach that we took is basically if it hadn't been done here, then we allocated it here, except in a couple cases, right? So you can see this one, replace the collapsing storm drain on North Columbia. We went out and went to do that project and realized it didn't need to be done. So that's basically been pulled from the list. I didn't pull it off of this one just so that you guys have full visibility into what we have spent or intend to spend. And so.
So can I ask a question?
Of course,
The
absolutely.
column that says currently in budget question mark, does that mean it's currently in the FY25 budget?
That is, sorry.
Because for that one in particular, you have a yes.
Nope, this is the capital file that I used for this year.
Okay.
So if it's in that one, it means it was in last year's, or I guess this current year's budget. It's not in the budget that we
In
were
the
talking
FY24
about.
budget.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. So, so the items you see, sorry, Chris.
Got it.
You see estimated spend in FY24, and then you said you see remaining spend in 25.
And it has nothing, yes.
So unless I missed it, hopefully those amounts are in capital for the FY25 budget year. Does that answer your
But
question?
that line in particular, all you say is pipe is sound, and you're telling us it's not gonna be in the budget for FY25.
Yeah, so I didn't think I gave you my comments on here, but I did. So in a few of these, so you can see, let's see, 1, 2, 3, the fuel station. We talked about that one already, right? So we anticipated this year, it's like 5 or 6 down. Sorry, the writing's very small. We anticipated that we were going to spend $75,000 installing the new as of 5 years fuel tank that we have sitting at the public works yard, but we changed that and we went to gas cards instead. And so what we're going to do in lieu of that is sell that gas tank and scrap the other one, right? So you can see in those two things, there's no spend in either year. That basically means it just dropped off the capital expending.
It's the currently in budget column that's giving me a little heartburn that I don't understand, because that says, yes, it's in the budget.
Yep, that was for this year's. So I wanted to make sure, this is my working file, so.
This is fiscal year 24 though, this column says currently in budget.
Yes.
Okay.
That means
So-
FY24.
So as we do a monthly capital meeting with Public Works and anyone else that needs to be associated with it. And so what I've used this document as is a running list of things that need to happen. So here's kind of the break, this blank line right here is kind of the break above which was in largely the FY24 budget, and below which is kind of my running list of things that needed to happen. This one here.
Okay, the one above it says EOC.
Yeah, so the bollards. So we found probably 2 weeks ago that our soil is not suitable for the bollards that we got
Can I jump in?
Yeah, absolutely.
This has been an ongoing issue. We purchased the bollards because they were free, and they sat for 2 years and with no plans to put them in. So the time was coming to, we purchase these outright and then we get reimbursed from the grant that we were awarded. Time was coming up, and so we said, we need to get this project put together. They went out and looked, and one of the things was they needed to put basically an impenetrable line to protect, basically, when we closed the downtown for events that vehicles can't come through. It was a Homeland Security grant type of a thing. And they have to be placed an exact width apart. Well, lo and behold, we have gas lines, water lines, sewer lines in those exact spots because these bollards need to go down 4 feet into the ground. So then we kind of, this spring earlier this winter, redid it and said, okay, what if we just do it as a deterrent and we place them where we can, They said, okay, that wasn't the intent, but we'll approve you to use it for that use. So we didn't know what was going to be like when we actually needed to go in and install them. So we decided to do a test one on in between the Times Theater and Krabby Oyster. So basically we could shut off that very last end of Broadway. And when they got into there, the groundwater was so high that they couldn't be placed in. So the bollards were unusable in our community. So we are going to now, we've bought things that we cannot use, and so we're going to try to sell them. This goes back to a different philosophy that we've been discussing, especially with Ann, our grants writer, and that is we don't go chasing grants because there's free money out there. We identify the improvements we need within our community and then see if there are sources to fund them. And we plan out the full project from the beginning to the end before we go out and get it, and then decide what the cost is to get them installed. Because we had another one that was also awarded, and with a budget of $30,000, and it was to buy some equipment, and then the installation was going to be $80,000 above on what we budgeted. And it was just like, okay, time out. We're going to do grants differently. So it was a hard lesson for some of our staff to learn, but that's kind of where we are today. And I think we're in a better position moving forward. Sorry, I don't mean to take that long on every line item on our capital projects.
I had a question about the key cards for the gas. So there's no emergency place where city and police and other vehicles can get gas if, like, maybe none of the cards work or there's no electricity.
We got an account at the Chevron, so that's kind of the best short-term option if for whatever reason power goes out.
The other thing is, in order to move our accounts over to the local station here, we've talked to them, and they're going to put in backup generators and things like that, so that if the power goes out, they're still able to provide the pumps still work. Now, whether the gas gets here in a big emergency, it'd be the same whether it can get to our public works yard or get to there. But
Well, that's why Pacific Power has kept theirs. It's way cheaper for them, and they do have cards, and they use their cards, but they also still have their little gas station there that they can fill their trucks up with, because in '07 storm, nobody could get gas, but they had gas for their trucks.
And they've got Pacific Power cards also. So the CFN group that we contract with gives us a card for CFN and is it Pacific Pride?
No, I'm talking Pacific Power.
Oh, which one's that?
Pacific Power, the
Oh,
power
the power
company.
company. I'm sorry.
They have their own little
Yes,
gas
yes.
station because of emergencies, because in the 2008 storm, there was no gas here, but the trucks were still rolling, and they were also doing EMS's work. They were going getting people out, taking them to EMS because EMS didn't have gas or they couldn't get to where the people were. So I don't know if it's wise to completely dump the gas storage station.
At that point, the stations didn't have generators though. At that point, none of the stations did.
Right. We'll also have an emergency supply of diesel at least, so that the fire trucks can run.
do have for that. We have a trailer that we got on a grant that can be deployed during events and stuff like that.
As soon as, of course,
But the current tank we had was deteriorating so bad that it was deterring our vehicles because there was water and other things getting into the tank. And so anyway, that was a decision we made.
To decommission that tank and for environmental cleanup or anything?
Yeah, I think the hope is that we are able to sell it, and even if it's for $1, someone will take all that cost on to remove it and things like that.
You have to clean up the land?
Yeah, we'll have to do an analysis of the soils underneath it and stuff like that.
So expensive.
It's costly.
Yeah, just ask Bruce Smith. He lost his whole lot over that.
Yeah, that's true.
So, yeah, it might just, I don't know.
The other thing, and I mean, of course, it's always kind of a roll of the dice if something, the power goes out for a week, but the commitment that CFN made in the circumstance that happens was that they would bring a mobile fueling station out here that we could pull off of too within, I want to say they said it 24 hours. And we've got 24 hours of fuel in all the trucks at all times. So Between that, our emergency supply of diesel and hopefully CFN bringing a mobile station out here, we would be able to get through. So I wanted to provide something that gave you guys a little bit of, I'm not gonna go line by line through these because a lot of these we've already talked about, and we talked about last year, but gives you a little bit of insight when you're going through the budget and you see capital, because it all gets aggregated together as either a building or a land purchase or an equipment purchase or whatever in the capital lines. So I wanted you to have a peek behind the curtain, so to speak, in terms of what's budgeted in those and where. Would you add anything else to the capital discussion, Spencer?
I have a question on the building for the visitors guides. How confident are you on that $20,000 number to build that? Because I'm on the TAC commission and just kind of listening to what that would take to build. I'm having a hard time believing they get that done for $20,000. Are you guys confident on that number?
That's something we got from Ed. I'd have to go back and check. We may have to revisit that. We had a placeholder on there before Ed got here, and I can't remember if this 20,000 was that placeholder for something more accurate, but I know he's been involved. The one thing is, I think once we do decide what to do, the Visitor Bureau has the money to spend, and so if we need to come back to the council, we'll try to get it right. The other thing is, with us about to purchase the property, there may be more options than we were originally looking at, and so we'll have further discussions on that. But
I would just be concerned if the number goes much higher than that. Is it really worth it to house visitors guides when I could think of probably 5 other ways to house them a lot cheaper? I mean, if it's 20,000, I mean that's probably, but you could get a storage unit for 100. You could put a shipping container on the Public Works property for 4,000.
so one of the problems is they are at Public Works, and Public Works is out of storage that they need for their operations daily. So part of the goal is to get it out. And so no, I completely see what you're going at, which is it's an expensive thing. We do need to we need to get out of Public Works though. Actually, and right now, they got moved out of Public Works, and they're in storage at the sewer treatment plant. So we're going to see how that goes.
But what I hear is, looking at the options, do you really have to build a building, or can you do a container, or can you do a prefab, or, you know?
I mean, if you could get it done for 20,000, I think that's probably in the ballpark, but much more.
What we were really talking about is like a storage shed. When we talked about it originally, we thought about putting it on there's a concrete pad that's not being used just to the immediate west of the restrooms. We thought we could do that and put a nice mural on the side or something like that. We may look at putting it back in the corner of the property. It's not much more than a placeholder for now and something that we need to do, but there hasn't been much more work on that.
So does that include storage for the chamber?
No. So the main thing is our visitors guides. We get, 7 pallets of guides. It takes up a lot of space. That's a big thing of what they do. And right now, they're basically borrowing space from Public Works. That Public Works is now keeping their stuff outside. So.
Does the estuary purchase deplete the ARPA fund then? Would that put you at the end of the ARPA?
Yep, we would use 100% for that.
Yeah, it is.
And fingers crossed that we can get that done in a. We should note, for those of you who were not here for the audit presentation, that because of the amount we're spending of the ARPA funds in one chunk, we're going to incur an extra little bit on our audit costs. I think you said it was 5,000 or 7,000 or something like that, because we have to do a single audit for the government as a result of that. So just an FYI.
But then you'll have that done. Right?
But then it would be done, yes.
Yep,
we'd close it out.
Yeah.
Could I ask a favor?
Of course.
And that is, when you produce a grid like this, if you could keep the numbers that come off Excel down the side, so the line numbers, so we can say line 1, line 2, line 3. It makes it much easier to maneuver.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Any other questions?
Let me make sure there's nothing up this one. I don't think there is.
5:11. Let's recess this meeting until next Wednesday, April the 10th. At 3 o'clock, same time, same place.
I just